December 1941 saw Pearl Harbor lying in ruins. Nevertheless, the arsenal of democracy retaliates, and within months, thousands of pilots will take to the skies in planes manufactured by automakers, crafted with a singular purpose: to avenge Pearl Harbor. Over half a century ago, an unsettled world erupted into flames. Years of depression and isolation had fostered the belief that America was insulated from distant global conflicts. Yet, as the war escalated, America was compelled into an unprecedented unity. This collective determination, focused on a singular objective, would later be dubbed the Arsenal of Democracy. Few examples embody the arsenal of democracy as vividly as the Avenger, a Navy bomber with pride in its name. Forged by the hands of men and women, including automakers, seamstresses, machinists, and housewives, the Avenger stands as a monument to a time when an entire nation dedicated itself to achieving a single goal. Desperately in need of the tools of war to support a generation thrust into battle on foreign shores, America turned to the arsenal of democracy. The Avenger earned its name as the billows of black smoke still rose from the devastated Navy base at Pearl Harbor. Answering the call to avenge the Japanese attack, this torpedo bomber would fulfill its mission, as Japanese battleships and German U-boats soon discovered. From the Battle of Midway to the war's final day, the formidable Avenger not only served as a deadly Navy bomber, but also as a constant reminder of the achievements possible when America unites. On December 7, 1941, the Japanese Navy launched over 360 planes from 6 carriers positioned within striking distance of the US naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Unaware of the impending assault, American servicemen and civilians at Pearl Harbor were caught off guard. The base's Pacific Fleet units included more than 70 combat vessels and 24 auxiliaries, most of which were docked for the weekend. Among the 8 battleships in the harbour, 5 were sunk, 1 severely damaged, and the remaining 2 were hit. 2 destroyers were also sunk, while 140 aircraft were destroyed, with another 80 damaged. Fortunately for the Navy, its 3 carriers were absent from the harbour during the attack. Nevertheless, the loss of over 2,300 military personnel deeply affected the nation, hastening America's entry into the war. "Remember Pearl Harbor" would echo as the battle cry of the Navy's Pacific Fleet for the ensuing 4 years. Exactly 3 months before the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the inaugural flight of a new Navy torpedo bomber prototype took to the skies. This aircraft represented Grumman's submission for a design competition aimed at replacing the outdated torpedo bombers of the 1930s. Despite winning the contract, Grumman faced a significant challenge. Its factories were already stretched thin due to mass production of fighters. As production of the new torpedo bomber commenced, it became evident that Grumman would need assistance to meet demand. The day after Pearl Harbor, the US government mandated a halt to all automobile production. Almost instantly, assembly lines ground to a halt, leaving thousands of auto workers without employment overnight. Representatives from General Motors hastily pursued government contracts in a bid to sustain their plants. Their efforts to secure minor contracts, such as producing wheels for bombers or wings for the P-47, yielded unexpected results. Consequently, the auto giant found itself in need of establishing a new division, with GM veteran Cliff Goad appointed as general manager. Thomas Goad, his son, vividly recalls the whirlwind of events that ensued.
They thought they had a potential to get the P-47 wing, and that was when they happened to walk into the War Department. I remember someone from Linden, this investigation team that was trying to find a contract, and just at the right time that the government decided that Grumman had this neat new torpedo bomber, the Avenger, they were starting to build, and it was going to be the backbone of a Navy carrier-based bomber.
Driven by the urgency for contracts, General Motors embraced the challenge of aircraft manufacturing, birthing the Eastern Aircraft Division of General Motors. Transitioning from car production to aircraft manufacturing proved to be a monumental task. The looming threat from the East instilled a fear that permeated all levels of American society. The prevailing perception of the Japanese Empire depicted it as an unstoppable military force bent on dominating the Pacific and beyond. Anticipating a potential invasion, Americans were bombarded with newsreels depicting the ever-expanding Japanese war machine in theaters nationwide. For the American worker, this looming threat served as a compelling impetus to embark on this formidable undertaking. Under immense pressure, General Motors allocated 5 plants stretching from Tarrytown, New York to Baltimore, Maryland to the cause. The initial hurdle was reconfiguring these plants for aircraft production.
Of course, number one, you got to clean the plants out completely. Just move every piece of equipment out of them. You don't want to just scrap it, because everything you can save, you want to put in a warehouse so you can, when the war is over, you know you're going to go back to building cars again. So you want to be able to save all the equipment so that you can set up again just as quickly after the war.
At the Linden, New Jersey plant alone, over 5 miles of conveyor equipment had to be dismantled. Meanwhile, at the Trenton plant, an airfield was constructed to facilitate testing of planes fresh off the assembly line. However, accommodating the Avenger posed a considerable challenge, as it was the largest carrier-based plane of its era. Consequently, several plants required expansion simply to accommodate its size.
In the case of the Linden, they had to have one section of the plant that they had to raise the roof. So when they had the assembled airplane, that they could take it down through that bay with the tail sticking up in the air to be able to clear the overhead rafters.
As GM officials scratched their heads over sprawling sheets of airplane blueprints supplied by Grumman, they realized that their greatest challenge would be finding people that could build an airplane.
They had to go and recruit from all over General Motors engineers and people with skills in airplanes, because the aircraft companies they couldn't afford to let any of their people go. Government said you couldn't. You had to build these airplanes with your own people, and you can learn as much as you can from the aircraft companies. Go visit them and see what they do, but you can't have any of their people, because they need those people to build the planes they're already building.
A monumental endeavour was underway as men and women from across the nation united to manufacture the tools of war. With the conflict raging, time was scarce, and there was an abundance of work to be completed. On June 4, 1942, the Japanese Navy launched its most extensive offensive since the Pearl Harbor attack, targeting the US-held island of Midway. Unlike Pearl Harbor, US forces were aware of the impending assault. However, Japanese planes were en route to the island before the Americans could strike the enemy carriers. The Japanese assault on Midway Island was relentless and overwhelming. For the United States, the Battle of Midway was a pivotal moment. Failure to halt the Japanese advance would allow them to establish a base within striking distance of Hawaii, strengthening their hold on the Pacific. Just days before the Japanese offensive, 6 Grumman Avengers were dispatched to Midway Island, marking their debut in frontline action. These 6 planes were among the first Avengers to engage in combat. Over 2 tense days, inexperienced Navy pilots, having completed a condensed training course, awaited their call to duty. The remainder of the torpedo bombers tasked with confronting the Japanese fleet were the outdated Douglas Devastators already aboard the USS Hornet. For these torpedo bombers, the Battle of Midway resulted in significant losses. By late morning on June 4th, deck handlers aboard the USS Hornet anxiously awaited the return of 15 Douglas Devastators that had departed earlier to engage the enemy fleet. However, the crew aboard the Hornet would never witness the return of their planes. All 15 Devastators were downed by Japanese Zeros, with only one pilot surviving. Similarly, of the 6 Avengers that departed Midway that morning, 5 were also shot down. In a single day, Torpedo 8 suffered the loss of 20 planes and 44 men. Despite the devastating toll on Torpedo 8 at Midway, it's crucial to recognize that their sacrifices were not in vain. The true hero of the Battle of Midway was the Navy dive bomber, the Douglas SBD, affectionately known as the Dauntless on carrier decks. While it's accurate to attribute the sinking of Japanese carriers to these dive bombers, to suggest they could have achieved this without the presence of torpedo bombers overlooks key facts, a point often missed by some historians. During the Battle of Midway, torpedo bombers were the first to engage. Upon arrival, Japanese Zeros swarmed the low-flying American planes, while anti-aircraft gunners targeted the advancing torpedo bombers. With all eyes fixed on the action near the surface of the ocean, the dive bombers swarmed down from above, taking the Japanese ships by storm. It was a classic high-low attack, culminating in the destruction of 4 Japanese carriers. By the evening of June the 4th, victory had been secured at Midway, a pivotal moment in the Pacific theatre of war. Meanwhile, at General Motors, a very different battle was unfolding, the struggle to initiate aircraft assembly lines. Automotive employees were grappling with the unfamiliar task of building airplanes. With much of the workforce either deployed to war or allocated to other plants, GM turned to a vital resource that would become the backbone of their workforce during the war: women. Even prior to the war, women had demonstrated their proficiency as skilled seamstresses, having long dominated the labour force in garment and textile industries. Transitioning to airplane production proved to be a smooth shift for seamstresses.
Isn't this a funny place for you?
Not if it helps win the war.
But after clerking in a fashionable store,
I like it here, and it saves my clothes.
yes, I suppose it would.
Did you ever try pleasing a bunch of women shoppers all day?
No, I never did.
Well, here I just have to please the boss, and he's a man.
And the work isn't too hard for you?
No, I used to work in a butcher's shop. I like this better. It's more excitement.
Isn't this pretty hot for you, Miss Spillane?
Well, I hear it gets kind of hot around the kitchen stove, too.
I never thought of that.
Yes, and it gets pretty hot out there in the South Pacific.
Given that airplane wings and tail sections primarily consisted of fabric, women were heavily involved in the subassembly of these components. However, in World War II, women's roles extended far beyond sewing, giving rise to the iconic figure of Rosie the Riveter. While the existence of a singular real-life Rosie remains uncertain, her symbolization embodies the invaluable contributions made by women during the war effort. She's really more of a mythical figure, a symbol of the American woman during World War II, a woman who put down the knitting needles and picked up a rivet gun. Rosie, the woman who exchanged her bonnet for a welding mask, transcended racial and socio-economic boundaries. She tirelessly worked long hours with a singular purpose: to contribute to the production of superior aircraft, knowing that they will be flown by her loved ones, her sons and brothers. Under the vigilant supervision of the Navy, she engaged in drilling, sanding, riveting and welding, standing shoulder to shoulder with her male colleagues. Despite the unwavering dedication of Eastern aircraft employees, instructing automakers in aircraft construction proved to be a challenging endeavour. To facilitate this process, Grumman provided General Motors with 2 PK ships. Grumman engineers constructed an Avenger using Parker Callon fasteners instead of rivets. The aircraft was then transported to General Motors, where the PK fasteners could be replaced. These PK ships served as invaluable references for the automakers, and by the autumn of 1942, the Avenger assembly at GM plants was well underway. On November 11, 1942, an eager crowd anxiously awaited the maiden flight of the GM-built Avenger. This flight held immense significance, not only because it would demonstrate the aircraft's functionality, but also because it would validate the automaker's achievement of building a flying machine. This aircraft was designated as the TBM, where TB denoted torpedo bomber and M signified General Motors. Notably, the Avengers deployed at the Battle of Midway bore the designation TBF, with F indicating Grumman's involvement. Beyond the Navy designation, both the Grumman TBF and the General Motors TBM were identical aircraft. This standardization was mandated by the Navy to ensure interchangeability of parts between the two variants. The bomb bay doors, shown here in the open position, house the torpedo, affectionately known by Avenger pilots as the Fish. The Avenger was a formidable aircraft, characterized by its large size and powered by a massive 1700 horsepower Wright engine necessary for carrier takeoffs. Robust landing gear designed to endure rigorous landings was a hallmark feature of all Navy planes. This was particularly crucial for the Avenger, renowned as the largest carrier-based aircraft of World War II. Crewed by 3 members, the Avenger played a vital role in naval operations throughout the war, earning a distinguished reputation for its versatility and reliability. One sat in an electrically controlled ball gun turret towards the back of the fuselage. The pilot sat in the front of the large greenhouse-style canopy, while the bombardier, who released the torpedo bombs, depth charges and mines, sat in the rear at the back of the bomb bay doors. By the war's end, nearly 10,000 Avengers had been manufactured, ferrying almost 30,000 aviators into the perilous theatres of war. Among these aviators was a young high school student named George Bush. Opting to forego a college opportunity, Bush enlisted with the Navy on his 18th birthday with aspirations of piloting the Avenger.
I chose torpedo bombers. I wasn't. Some of it was that I didn't think I was a particularly accomplished fighter jockey, one of these guys doing all these maneuvers. Secondly, the plane had great appeal to me. It was a team effort. There were 3 of us in the airplane. It was a stable aircraft. It was the largest carrier aircraft. So I asked to be trained for torpedo bombers, and I never regretted it. It was risky, of course, but that just went with the territory in those days.
Upon earning his wings in the summer of 1943, Bush commenced training in his newly acquired Avenger, which he affectionately named Barbara after his girlfriend back home. The dashing Bush was assigned to Torpedo Squadron 51, serving aboard the light carrier USS San Jacinto. One aspect that deeply impressed Bush about his new role was the importance of teamwork.
You had a crew, you had a team. I don't know whether you can see this, but in the back of behind the pilot, there was a turret, and you had a turret gunner in there, and then in the bottom of the airplane, you had what they called a stinger gunner, or tail gunner, and they helped keep the plane up. We'd wash our own airplane. Our crews, we had a crew captain on the deck, on the carrier, but it just came together. You got to know them well. You shared experiences with them, and I've always liked team sports, team effort, even in the White House. And so I think that team concept had an appeal to me when I decided to try for torpedo bombers as opposed to fighters.
Like all naval aviators, Bush had to acclimatize to life on ship, which could be fraught with peril.
I guess my first recollection of the Pacific was these enormous high seas. And this was a converted cruiser hull, fast carrier. She ran with the big CVs. And it was hairy. One of our guys subsequently killed, turned absolutely green. I mean, you've heard of people get seasick and turn green. This guy was green. The seas were rough. We couldn't fly in that kind of weather. But again, it was just part of our maturing as a squadron.
Just days after George Bush's enlistment, the United States launched a full-scale offensive against the island of Guadal Canal. In September 1942, the initial contingent of Avengers began arriving at Henderson Field on Guadal Canal, forming part of an air group tasked with targeting Japanese shipping in the region. Despite being in service for only 3 months, Avengers had already acquired a rather unfavourable nickname. Marine Corps General George Dooley provides insight into this matter.
It was called a turkey. And why was it called a turkey? Well, because it sort of looked like a turkey. It sort of lumbered through the air, and in comparison to the F-6F Hellcat, which it closely resembled, it was not nearly as attractive.
During World War II, there was a pressing urgency to deploy Avenger pilots and their crews to the South Pacific. General George Dooley had a mere month to familiarize himself with his Avenger and his crew.
Seeing an enemy aircraft coming, batted at 12 o'clock. Well, actually, it was a bat at 6 o'clock. Pilots were all looking at 12 o'clock, and suddenly we realized that he had gotten twisted around, but he made up for it by shooting down the aircraft.
For American torpedo bombers, Japanese Zeros constituted only half the challenge.
If you're going in against an enemy that's shooting at you with everything it has, the one thing you're going to do is want to get a hit.
As the Battle of Guadal Canal unfolded, Navy aircraft began delivering significant blows to the Japanese fleet, despite the formidable challenges faced by Avenger crews. In a mere 2-day period in November 1942, the Japanese lost 2 battleships, 3 destroyers, 1 cruiser, and 11 cargo vessels. General Dooley flew against the mighty Japanese battleship Kenyugasa.
We're getting to the torpedo release point. Some gunner on the bow of the ship, the Kenyugasa, zeroed in on me, and I had little red golf balls rolling all around my left side of my aircraft. I finally had to settle down getting to the torpedo release point. At this point, the gunners started hitting me in the port wing, and all you could hear was that as these shells were hitting home. We released, and I went home, and on the way home, I nursed the aircraft very carefully, not knowing whether or not the wing was going to stay on. As it turned out, when we got home, the wing was very sturdy. It could have taken any number of Gs and still held up.
The errors observed at the Battle of Midway were not repeated at Guadal Canal. Torpedo bombers now assaulted ships with the full protection of Wildcat and Hellcat fighters providing cover overhead. By early 1943, American naval fighters had honed tactics for effectively engaging their skilled adversaries. While accumulated combat experience bolstered American prospects in the high-stakes aerial battles over the South Pacific, the introduction of a new fighter, the F-6F Hellcat, decisively tipped the scales in favor of American aviators. Since 1941, the Grumman Corporation had been prioritizing the production of their new fighter, the F-6F Hellcat, renowned for its superior durability compared to its predecessor, the Wildcat. The government urgently required Hellcats, prompting rapid production. With the intensification of the war effort, Rosie transitioned from riveter to pilot. The Women's Air Service Patrol, WASP, a group of highly skilled female pilots, played a pivotal role in ferrying Hellcats to the West Coast to meet the Navy's urgent demands. Though never formally endorsed by the Army Air Corps, the WASP stands as a proud chapter in Grumman's enduring legacy. By the summer of 1943, the Grumman Aircraft Company was dedicated almost exclusively to production of the coveted Hellcat. By this juncture, the US Navy wasn't the sole purchaser of Avengers. Britain expressed interest as well. The Women's Air Service Patrol diligently expedited the planes to Navy units on the West Coast and to the Royal Navy under Lend-Lease provisions. By January 1944, Grumman ceased all Avenger production, redirecting focus entirely on the Hellcat. The Navy and General Motors were so assured of their capabilities that all Avenger production was entrusted to them. In December of 1943, the 1,000th Avenger had rolled off the assembly line at the GM plant in Trenton, New Jersey. The subsequent 1,000 would be manufactured in less than a third of the time. Eastern Aircraft's general manager, Cliff Goad, had earned such respect among industry leaders like Larry Bell, Donald Douglas, and Glenn Martin that he was appointed chairman of the Aircraft War Production Council. Cliff Goad's son, Tom, also developed a newfound appreciation for aviation.
I lived and breathed airplanes then. I've made models of the Wildcat and the Avenger, and I dreamed of being a Navy flyer someday. And it was very inspiring, you know.
Allied triumphs at Guadal Canal and in New Guinea had unmistakably put the Japanese on the defensive in the Pacific Theatre. US naval forces initiated an island-hopping campaign aimed at securing communication and supply routes from Australia, while establishing air bases to facilitate deeper strikes into Japanese-held territories. As the island-hopping strategy unfolded, Avenger squadrons found themselves deployed in the crucial role of close air support for Marines landing on the beach. Each Avenger could carry 4 500-pound bombs, delivering a formidable blow against entrenched Japanese troops on the beachhead. Following days of intensive bombardment to soften Japanese defences, the 7th Infantry Division and the 4th Marine Division executed landings on the Kwajalein Atoll. By the conclusion of the first week of February, the major resistance on Kwajalein had been subdued, marking another significant stride in the Allies' island-hopping campaign. The Navy had planned to move further into the Marshall Islands in mid-April, but Japanese resistance had been so weak at Kwajalein that further Marine landings moved forward ahead of schedule. In the aftermath of days of relentless aerial bombardment from Navy Avengers, US Marines traversed through the devastated landscape in search of any remaining pockets of enemy resistance. By the conclusion of the Marshall Islands campaign, over 600 Americans had perished, with another 1,800 wounded, while Japanese casualties exceeded 9,000. Mere weeks after the initial landing, airstrips were swiftly constructed and Avenger squadrons were primed for the impending advance towards Japan. By June of 1944, the US fleet had solidified its control over Saipan and Guam. Concurrently, one of the most significant battles of World War II was unfolding, the Battle of the Philippine Sea, also referred to as the Marianas Turkey Shoot. This monumental clash between naval aviators would go down in history as the largest aerial battle ever waged between two carrier forces. High in the skies over the Philippine Sea, the Hellcat fighter reigned supreme. On the first day alone, the Japanese Navy lost 156 planes to American fighters. To differentiate torpedo bombers from their Japanese counterparts and to prevent confusion, Hellcat pilots adopted an unconventional tactic. They carried model airplanes, typically considered children's toys.
The Air Force or the Army at that time made they're made out of a very hard plastic material, and they used them to help train the pilots on identifying aircraft. They were normally just an all-black plastic, and they had these on all the Allied planes and all the German and Japanese planes, so that they could help teach the pilots and the aircraft gunners the various airplanes so they could identify them.
Relentless bombardment gradually weakened Japanese resistance, and by the conclusion of June, nearly all of the Marianas Islands had fallen under US control. With the Marianas firmly secured, the Navy turned its attention to the pivotal island of Guam. By late 1944, Japanese forces were clinging to their last remaining outposts in the South Pacific. In October, American fast carrier forces launched their decisive offensive against the Japanese, advancing towards Okinawa and Formosa. As the Pacific theatre of war progressed, Avenger squadrons increasingly transitioned from torpedo attacks against Japanese shipping to conducting bombing missions. From Luzon to Mindoro to the liberation of the Philippines, Avenger squadrons pounded relentlessly an enemy that was quickly losing its grip on the war. In a final bid to halt the advancing American fleet, the Japanese resorted to desperate measures. Sailors of the US Navy escort carrier group Taffy 1 were taken aback to witness Japanese aircraft diving straight towards their ships. This marked the first encounter for the Navy group with the notorious kamikaze attacks. Employing a relentless barrage of anti-aircraft fire, the sailors endeavored to block the skies, serving as the primary defense against the suicidal pilots. And although a few managed to hit American ships, most kamikazes found only the ocean at the end of their dive. Unfazed by the looming threat posed by the kamikazes, the American fleet pressed forward towards the Bonin Islands, situated a mere 750 miles south of Tokyo. Of particular importance was the main island of Iwo Jima. The Allies wanted it to establish a base for fighters that would later protect the B-29s slated to bomb Japan. In February and March of 1945, Avengers played a pivotal role in the two Iwo Jima campaigns, providing crucial close air support for the Marines engaged in combat on the island. Close air support was crucial, and after one of the most bitter struggles of the war, the victorious Marines raised the flag over Iwo Jima. Despite the US Navy's steady progress in the Pacific War, naval aviators faced relentless daily challenges. Landing a plane on a carrier deck with only one wheel was not a skill Navy pilots had trained for. It was something they had to learn on the job. During World War II, ejection seats were not available, leaving pilots with three options if their plane became disabled: jumping out, ditching the aircraft in the sea, or attempting a carrier landing, as demonstrated by this Hellcat pilot. Jumping out of a crippled plane was typically seen as a last resort due to the unreliability of parachutes and the risk of being struck by the tail of the aircraft during egress. Landing on the water was generally a safer bet, but only if the plane was responsive enough to turn upwind and be gently touched down. If the plane remained flyable, a carrier landing was the preferred option, although it still posed significant risks. The danger inherent in aviation was a constant reminder for the automakers of General Motors.
Weight was no problem with a car. In fact, people liked the heavier car because they felt it rode more safely. It was a better riding car. It was a safer car. But airplanes, every ounce of weight was very, very important because the lighter it is, the more it can carry, the more ammunition, the more guns, the better fighting machine it can be, the faster it can be. It's just a very different attitude. You had to build it light, strong, and rugged.
The Avenger, renowned for its ruggedness and inheriting the proud tradition of Grumman Ironworks, repeatedly demonstrated its ability to withstand considerable punishment and return safely to the ship. However, for Ensign George Bush of Torpedo Squadron 51, September 2, 1944 marked a day when his Avenger would not return to the ship. Departing from the USS San Jacinto that morning, Bush embarked on a mission that would profoundly alter his life.
Well, it was a momentous day in my life that I will never forget. September 2nd, 44, early in the morning. We had flown over Chichijima the day before, and so we were to go back again the next day.
A mission targeting a heavily defended radio station. With the fleet moving south, the station had to be hit on this mission.
This was the last day that the fleet was going to be under Admiral Michener in the north. Task Force 58 was soon to become Task Force 38 under Admiral Halsey. So I knew that the fleet would be leaving that evening. We'd been told that. This is your last mission over the Bonin Islands. Fleet's going south, which came to haunt me later on when I was floating around in the water, because I say, if they're going south and I'm sitting up here, it won't be too good.
En route to the target, the 4 Avengers divided into 2 pairs. Bush and his wingman were tasked with striking one radio station, while the other 2 Avengers targeted another station.
It was a rather clear day. Climbed to about 10 or 12,000 feet. Got the signal from our squadron leader to push over into a dive. We were doing what they call glide bombing. This plane was designed not to go almost straight down like a dive bomber, but in a glide. And we were carrying 400 or 500-pound bombs. My target was the radio station. And the minute we got over the target, or near the target, we could see that we were in for a rather warm reception, because the flak was all over these angry black puffs. And I pushed the plane over into a dive, and about halfway down, seeing this stuff breaking all around you, you could feel the plane go up like this, and suddenly it was engulfed in smoke and fire. And I did manage to finish the bombing run, and then pulled out over the ocean and made a turn so that people in the back could get out.
After ensuring his crew members had ample time to bail out of the plane, Bush himself climbed onto the wing.
It was very scary. You couldn't hardly see the instruments. And I jumped and pulled the ripcord too early, and I hit my head on the tail of the airplane and ended up with a great big, like a strawberry in baseball, you know, when you slide, just rip the skin off. And ironically, the chute had hung up on just for a moment on the tail of the plane, ripped some of the panels out of this pie-cut parachute, and I looked up. I was dazed by that, came to, and there I was floating down into the Pacific. You could see the Japanese island right there very clearly. Landed in there. I'd forgotten to hook my seat pack, and so one of the fighter pilots dove down and showed me where that was. I swam over and got it, inflated it, climbed into the raft, and proceeded to set the record for the fastest yellow raft in the history of the Pacific, trying to go away against the wind, away from this island of Chichijima.
Hellcat pilots then strafed a Japanese boat dispatched to capture Bush, who was left alone in a life raft with minimal protection.
I was carrying a .38 caliber pistol. I knew enough about those islands to know that they were not kind to prisoners when they got them. In fact, the commandant of that place was later tried on a war crimes trial and was hung for eating the liver of the pilots. So I unflexed my .38, not knowing what the hell I'd do with it. And fortunately didn't have to do someone else in or myself in.
In 1945, General Motors celebrated the construction of their 7,000th Avenger. Just 4 years earlier, they were primarily manufacturing automobiles, yet by the war's end, they had produced over 3/4 of all Avengers for the Navy. This monumental conversion effort did not go unappreciated by President Truman, who visited the plant with the Secretary of Defense and a group of very grateful Navy admirals. Before Japan officially surrendered on September 2, 1945, Avengers were deployed in airfields across Japan. From their fateful beginnings at Midway to their crucial contributions against U-boats in the Atlantic, and ultimately to their triumphant presence in Tokyo, the Avenger, emblematic of the arsenal of democracy, remained steadfast throughout. Could industries throughout America ever again unite as they did during World War II?
Well, if you were told we can't build any more cars and we're going to have to do something with our people, I'm sure we would learn how to build whatever product the government wants us to build to support whatever major effort we're going after. Win a war or whatever we're doing. I think that's just the American spirit.
The Avenger continued to serve with the Navy until 1955, albeit not in a combat capacity. During the Korean War, it was extensively utilized for cargo transport between Japan and the fleet. As the Cold War unfolded, the Avenger assumed a crucial role in the Navy's efforts to track down Soviet submarines. Additionally, various other Avenger variants, including the Sea Search variant equipped with the large searchlight in the bomb bay and the electronic countermeasures variant, briefly saw service with the Navy. Remarkably, the Avenger still takes to the skies today, a testament to its enduring legacy and the remarkable history of this iconic aircraft. From Alabama to Arizona, the pilots of the Jet 8 generation fly through peaceful skies in a living relic that once brought terror to Japanese ships and German U-boats. Today, the Avenger primarily participates in air shows and reunions, piloted by aviators who continue the legacy of a bygone era, a time when a tumultuous world erupted into chaos. It was an era when the industries of America rallied together in their own arduous battle, striving to forge a unified and formidable arsenal of democracy.
Mr. Vice President, at the time, you were the youngest naval aviator in World War II. How did you come to join the Navy? How did you decide to enlist?
Well, I signed up on my 18th birthday as a seaman second class. I waited it, having graduated from a boarding school, till I was 18, was sworn in, determined to become a pilot. I'm a pilot. And right about that time, they changed the regulations so you could get to be a pilot without going through college or having had 2 years of college. And I guess the real reason is our country was engaged, had been bombed 6 months before Pearl Harbor took place, December 7th, 1941. And so when June of 42 rolled around and I became 18, everybody in this country wanted to go out and fight for freedom and fight against the imperialists and fight against the Nazis. So it wasn't a hard decision. It was one that I took earlier than some others in my class, for example, but the country was together.
Why an aviator? Why flying?
Oh, I don't know. I think the excitement of it, I've been intrigued by airplanes. I'd never flown one, but there was a certain glamour and excitement to it. I had always had great respect for the Navy. Even as a little kid, I remember going aboard a destroyer in New York when it came in around 1939. But I just was intrigued by naval aviation. I had great respect for the outfit, for the excellence, and though very, very young, I just aspired to be a Navy pilot, carrier-based Navy pilot.
Where was your training?
Well, it started in Chapel Hill, and that was the pre-flight school stage. First time I ever flew was in Minneapolis at what they called a E-base, Naval Air Station there at what's now Wool Chamberlain, the great commercial airfield. And we started flying in those Yellow Perils, those two-winged NTSs. And I flew there, coldest weather you can imagine. Never landed, I don't think, without some snow and ice on the ground until I got to Florida, where I went to advanced training, Texas, to Corpus Christi and some outlying air bases from Corpus. And I got my wings at Corpus, so that was the training scenario.
Was the San Jacinto your first ship assignment?
First and only ship. We put the ship into commission in either the end of 43 or early in 44, our air group to which I was assigned after I got my commission, went through torpedo bomber training, wanted to be a torpedo bomber. And then we did other training, and then our group, BT-51, was assigned to the San Jacinto when we put her in commission. I took her on a shakedown cruise down to Trinidad, did some anti-submarine work there, then on around through the Panama Canal and out into the Pacific in early 44.
Is there any way to describe your missions or the kind of day-to-day life of the pilot?
It's hard to describe the day-to-day missions. A lot of it was boredom. I was going over some letters that I'd sent home just the other day, and we did a lot of what they called ASP, anti-submarine patrol. And we'd go out in front of the fleet, each pilot assigned a certain sector, each pilot, torpedo bomber pilot, having some fighter cover, and we'd go out and search visually for for submarines or for hostile military action of any kind on the part of the Japanese. And some of it was boring. The actual combat missions, most of which were what we call glide bombing. Push a plane over in about a 35-degree angle, I guess, and we had 400 or 500-pound bombs, and most of the combat missions, of actual bomb dropping missions, were on of that nature.
Was that the kind of mission you were on the day you were shot down?
I would say my target was a radio station on Chichijima, near the island of Hajima. Sure, everybody's heard of that, and also Iwo Jima, which everyone has heard of. And my mission was to take out a radio station. We went up to about 10,000, 12,000 feet, came in that high, and then pushed over with wingmen and various groups following down and preceding us. And the air was full of this very, very black and ominous puffs that seemed almost surrealistic. I'd been shot at before, but never anything quite this intense, and I'll never forget it. You couldn't hear it, but you could almost feel the puffs of black smoke around you, anti-aircraft coming up from the ground.
What about when you went down to the water? What was that sensation like?
That was a few minutes later, and I was hit about halfway down a run, and the plane was on fire, cockpit filled up with smoke. I had 2 men in the back of the plane, and I continued the bombing run just to release my bombs over the target. This was all split-second stuff. We were going not fast by today's standards, but red line by old standards, and released the bombs, pulled out to sea, and then I saw that my airplane was simply not flyable. The wings on a torpedo bomber fold, and the gas tanks are on either side of the wings, and there was fire right along where the fold of the wings were, which made me think that any minute the wing tanks would blow. I couldn't hardly see the instruments because the smoke filled the compartment so high, and I did some emergency procedures so the people in the back of the plane could get out. One of them did, and regrettably one of them did. The one who did was killed incidentally on the way down. And made the radio calls to our skipper, and then I bailed out myself. Hit my head on the tail of the airplane for pulling my own ripcord too early, and landed in the Pacific, fairly close to the Japanese-held island, and broke the record for the 100-yard swimming dash to find my life raft and paddle out to sea. Today, 40-some years later, it doesn't seem like it all happened, and yet in a sense, it's been a very, very internal and important part of my life. Saddest part, of course, being the loss of 2 crewmen that were depending on me for their lives.
When you were in the water, what was the hope that went through your mind, or did you look for ships or something?
Well, I knew that night, Halsey's 5th Fleet was going to Mitscher's 5th Fleet was going to turn into Halsey's 3rd Fleet. We had been briefed on the fact that this was the last day our carrier was going to be in the northern Pacific waters, and that we were then to set sail for a general area of the Philippines. And so I knew that somebody better pick me up that day, or I would be picked up by the Japanese. And indeed, they did send a boat out, which was strafed. But I had hope that I would be picked up because they had rescue submarines stationed as often as possible when we made raids like this. And I knew there was a submarine on patrol. In fact, we had a special code to call if we got in distress, which I did. And then I understand when I got back to my ship that the commanding officer of our squadron did the same thing, called the submarine. But the trouble is they never knew whether the submarine got the message. So I must say I was apprehensive. I didn't know what was going to happen for a couple hours, and then out of the sea came a periscope and then a submarine, and thank God it turned out to be ours.
Had you ever been on a submarine before?
Well, been on the deck of one, but I'd never been on a patrol. We stayed on this thing it was a USS Finback, and I stayed on Finback for 30 days. To get some air, we went topside and stood watch at night. Some of the most majestic nights I've ever seen in my life. The stars so bright you could touch them, or a flying fish, and a lot of time to think about what I'd been through and think about life. faith and all that kind of thing. And we got depth charged. Our commanding officer of that submarine was awarded the Silver Star for the amount of Japanese tonnage sunk while I was right in that submarine. So it was more terrifying than flying. Submariners didn't think so, but we 3 pilots who were picked up did.
How long were you on a sub?
About 30 days. 30 days. And they didn't have any extra beds, so one guy would climb out of a bed and I'd climb in. A little dank in there, I might add, too. That air conditioning wasn't too good, and you could take a shower once a week. And even then, some guy'd be standing there with a stopwatch saying you didn't use up more than 20 seconds worth of water.
Where did you go after that in terms of your naval career?
Well, the submarine took me back to, I think it was Midway. And then I got off and flew a Navy air transport plane, just hitched a ride down to Pearl Harbor. Had some rest time there, and then hitchhiked on back out to the fleet, which is thousands of miles away. And by that time, out in the Philippines, and the last air strike I flew was over the Philippine Islands, over Manila. And then we were relieved and came back in time for Christmas '44, joined another squadron, had our orders to go out overseas again, BT-153, and the war ended. And meantime, I'd been married, so I was just thrilled about all that.
Then you were an instructor? And
No, I was just normal torpedo bomber pilot, training up new guys that hadn't been in combat and flying my missions and doing our gunnery and doing our bombing runs and all of that, same kind of airplane.
As you look back on a naval experience, is there any summing up you can do about its importance to your life? Or
I think it was probably the single most maturing experience I had. I went in there as an 18-year-old kid out of a rather sheltered environment and came out having nearly lost my life a couple of times. I had to land another time in a torpedo bomber in the water with 400 or 500-pound deck charges in it. So that was the one that kept me on the ball. And I saw lives lost right on our flight deck. Saw a chief petty officer and cut in half when I was just landed my plane, standing there. This guy was just cut apart. The flight deck was stunned, and this fantastic chief petty officer yelled at the men to grab a hose, clean this mess up. Come on, let's get this ship going. And it's life, and yet it was life going on. And this made an impression on me as an 18-year-old kid, 20-year-old kid saying this kind of thing. But it really formed my impressions about the need for a strong military, the need for the country to be together when things are rough out there. I think combat is something I hope none of my 5 kids and none of my 9 grandchildren will ever be involved in. But it gave my life a dimension that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise, and it gave me a great respect for the armed services of the United States. It gave me a great respect for those who risk their lives now, even though maybe not in a combat situation. But I think of the recent raids on Libya, superb performance by the Air Force, the Navy. And I just think, I guess to sum it up, it's heightened my convictions about the rightness and the greatness of the United States, and my convictions about the need to keep this country strong.
thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Excuse me. Could you ask him just to talk a little bit about the aircraft itself?
Okay. I'd like to ask you a couple questions about the Avenger.
Yeah.
What was it like flying that?
Well, I liked it because it was stable. It was then the biggest single-engine plane, I believe, in either the Air Force or the Navy. The Army Air Corps, or the Navy, it's then called. It was very stable, had a large wing. It was a 3-place plane. I was a pilot. Had a guy in the turret, then a guy below, tail gunner with a 50 caliber or 30 caliber pop gun back there, and the turret had, I forget what. We had some 20 caliber guns firing forward, the triggered from the stick. But the beautiful thing about the airplane was its stability for landing on a tossing deck. The CDL, fast carrier, but was a cruiser hull, very narrow, and I think she tossed more than the big CDs. So the thing that was reassuring, you could slow that airplane down and not worry as much about spinning in like you would from a Corsair or an F-6F or something of that nature. And it was stable, was dependable. You could take a hit and the plane could still fly. I remember landing it in the water, my plane having been disabled from engine troubles. Our ship couldn't take me on board, so I had to land in the water. I had 2 men on the plane, 400 or 500 pound depth charges, and a little bit of sea, not much, but I never got wet. Put the tail down, landed tail first, hull came in, climbed out on the wing, crewman climbed out through the turret, pulled out the life raft, and they didn't get wet. And the plane stayed there, floated for a while, and then gradually sank to the depths of the Pacific. But stability, dependability, thing could fly when a lot of airplanes were down.
Because there was no ejection seat, so when you went out, you just had to climb over the edge.
If you went out, you hopefully did it better than I did. You're supposed to dive out onto the wing, and the TPF had a bar across the top of it, so hoisted yourself out by this bar, and then dove out. I was supposed to put the plane in a right-hand turn, so then could get out of a door in the back, which I did, made a 360. Then I put it in a turn so I could get out, and but I pulled the ripcord too early, and my head struck the tail of the plane, so much so that I thought I'd really been wounded. Got down. In fact, one of the pilots, Doug West, who was flying a fighter, flying a torpedo bomber, saw me and dropped some medical supplies because he thought I'd been really hurt. It was really like a strawberry in baseball on your side when you slide. It just took the whole side of my skin off, but no damage at all. And I'm not too proud of that part of my exit from the airplane. It wasn't too easy a plane to get out. You couldn't dump it upside down because you had a bar on top of your head.
December 1941 saw Pearl Harbor lying in ruins. Nevertheless, the arsenal of democracy retaliates, and within months, thousands of pilots will take to the skies in planes manufactured by automakers, crafted with a singular purpose: to avenge Pearl Harbor. Over half a century ago, an unsettled world erupted into flames. Years of depression and isolation had fostered the belief that America was insulated from distant global conflicts. Yet, as the war escalated, America was compelled into an unprecedented unity. This collective determination, focused on a singular objective, would later be dubbed the Arsenal of Democracy. Few examples embody the Arsenal of Democracy as vividly as the Avenger, a Navy bomber with pride in its name. Forged by the hands of men and women, including automakers, seamstresses, machinists, and housewives, the Avenger stands as a monument to a time when an entire nation dedicated itself to achieving a single goal. Desperately in need of the tools of war to support a generation thrust into battle on foreign shores, America turned to the Arsenal of Democracy. The Avenger earned its name as the billows of black smoke still rose from the devastated Navy base at Pearl Harbor. Answering the call to avenge the Japanese attack, this torpedo bomber would fulfill its mission, as Japanese battleships and German U-boats soon discovered. From the Battle of Midway to the war's final day, the formidable Avenger not only served as a deadly Navy bomber, but also as a constant reminder of the achievements possible when America unites. On December 7, 1941, the Japanese Navy launched over 360 planes from 6 carriers positioned within striking distance of the US naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Unaware of the impending assault, American servicemen and civilians at Pearl Harbor